So we're back again. It's Friday, and that means it's time for ServerEye RFP training and technical assistance sessions. We're talking about performance measures and evidence, two key parts of the application. I'll admit that I've seen the last two videos, and they might make you a little sleepy. Lots of good information, but I don't know that we're as entertaining as a comic book action hero movie. So we'll see what we can do today using the chat box, or anyone who's out there who wants to break in, interrupt, go ahead and unmute today, and let's have a little bit more back and forth. Just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. One of the neat tricks about Zoom, if you are on a computer and aren't familiar with this, is you can actually use it like a walkie-talkie, pressing the space bar temporarily to unmute yourself, and then letting go of the space bar, you go unmute again. So that's really helpful. And if I haven't already introduced myself, Adam Donaldson, National Community Service Program Specialist at the Rhode Island Department of Education, on behalf of ServerEye and our AmeriCorps portfolio. Amanda Forget, my colleague, is also online helping to manage this training session and jumping in if she likes. So as always, we're going to have three goals today. The first, I want to help you know how to describe your performance measure. I should probably find out first what a performance measure is, and then where that is sort of in the application process. We're going to place your program design on the AmeriCorps evidence continuum, which is a thing, again, that I'll have to describe for you. And as always, hopefully you'll feel better afterwards, being prepared to respond to the ServerEye RFP. So we've talked elsewhere that AmeriCorps program design is built upon a logic model that proposes if we do this, then these other things will happen. And this includes both the immediate results from the AmeriCorps members' service activities or outputs, and from those outputs, an expectation of outcomes, which are changes in knowledge, behavior, or condition. For example, through our program Accessing Home, AmeriCorps members provide financial and housing counseling services. The output is the number of individuals who are counseled, and the outcome is the number of individuals housed in healthy, affordable homes. The outcome is a change in condition for those individuals. One of the things I like to point out is that the beneficiary is consistent from the output to the outcome. It's the same individual people, but we expect that the number in the outcome target will actually be fewer. So if 100 individuals receive services, perhaps only 75 are actually anticipated to be housed at the end of the day. We'll talk about this again in the context of performance measures. So we're adding a new layer to our logic model. We now need to design a way to know if we have been successful in our program. So we're going to add information about our output and outcome target number and how we will count or collect data to measure those output and outcomes. And in AmeriCorps, we call this a performance measure. On ServerEye RFP page 9, you'll read that we do expect applicants to select a performance measure or create one to correspond to a primary service intervention performed by the AmeriCorps members, but not corresponding to each and every potential member activity or community impact. We value the quality of performance measures over the quantity of performance measures. So in the application, you're going to say your performance measure includes one output and one connected or aligned outcome. And if you're diehard and you really want to do more performance measures than just one output and outcome, in the performance measure section of the application, I do recommend just talk to us first and get a sense of whether that makes sense for your program design, because we really are focused on having one strong measure. When choosing or developing your performance measure, we've already mentioned that it should be consistent with the theory of change and logic model. You should literally be able to kind of point at it in the logic model. Your AmeriCorps members are going to be awesome and they're going to get a lot done, but there's going to be a primary purpose to their activity. Your performance measure will be about that primary purpose. And the performance measure is not about the AmeriCorps members, but changes for the beneficiaries or the community. It turns out that AmeriCorps has predetermined a menu of measures called national performance measures that align with its own strategic plan in areas such as capacity building, disaster response and recovery, economic opportunity, education, the environment, health, and veteran and military families. Server I is going to ask that you navigate to this supplemental document from AmeriCorps about their performance measures to first see if what you're proposing is on the menu. And in just a minute, I'm going to demonstrate how you can do this. But I do want to be clear that your primary activity does not have to be on this menu. You can instead report your own performance measure called an applicant determined measure. We have to have good terms for these things, applicant determined measure, and we will look at how this is done as well. So what am I talking about? Let's try this. Hey folks, Adam Donaldson, National and Community Service Program Specialist with the Rhode Island Department of Education, rediscovering this thing called YouTube. I want to point out some features about AmeriCorps performance measures for folks who are applying to the Server I RFP, putting together their application. So if we point our browser to serverrhode-island.com/grants, we find all the good stuff. There's our RFP there, but wanted to point out some features of the performance measure instructions, which are located here. This is a document from AmeriCorps, not Server I, that talks about their national performance measures. That is the outputs and outcomes that AmeriCorps members and the intervention they deliver are setting out to achieve. Like any good cooking recipe, you're probably going to want to read this front start to bottom. At the end, all 29 pages, or you might notice that there are links in the table of contents. So if you're investigating an education program, you can click right there. Each performance measure is described with a fun little code. And if you ever hear me speaking about ED1A or 6, please stop me and getting out of my head. In each section, you'll see specifically outputs that are aligned and follow outcomes. And each has a definition and specific instructions on how to measure or collect the data. The outputs are often quite obvious, such as the number of individuals served, but in the context of an education program. And what it means to be served is defined. One of the key things about using the national performance measures is that it will tell you specifically some guidelines for how you can measure this data. So if you're going to be looking at the number of individuals served, you're going to need to have some program records, some tracking mechanism that specifically makes sure that the folks you're counting are not duplicated over time, but are unique human beings. If you look at another example, like ED6, an outcome, number of students with increased school attendance, you'll see that it shows for how you would collect data on that you should use records from the school district or classroom, or something else capable of measuring changes in attendance at the individual student level. So it is both generic so that you can further describe how you will go about doing those things, but it is also specific in sort of pointing you in a direction that you should follow. In addition to the content areas for AmeriCorps programming like education and healthy futures, veteran and military affairs, there are some important appendices that quickly point out understanding MSY member allocations is something that I'm going to talk about in a presentation. And another is the performance measure checklist. So anytime that you're writing an application and you've identified your performance measure and you're starting to write out some of the narrative for that performance measure, it's good to come back to this performance measure checklist. This is in fact the way that your application will be reviewed. And the performance measure itself doesn't score any points in the application review, but you have to have an improved performance measure in order for your application to be awarded. So you'll want to know that what you're writing aligns with all the points here. And it's pretty comprehensive, as you can see, like all things AmeriCorps. So for demonstration purposes, some of that was pre-recorded. I am curious if there's someone who would be willing to offer up a little bit of information about their program and to see if it might fall in the menu of national performance measures. Oh, and that's why we have a chat box. So we're going to have AmeriCorps members assisting teachers potentially in climate change and doing some professional development and distribution of kits sent to school groups. So it's a sort of environmental education program. So in that case, the place to start with the National Performance Measures menu is going to be looking at the education section, but also looking right at the environmental stewardship section to notice whether or not environmental education is on the menu. And I do think you'll find it there. And the question will be, when you read the instructions about who the units are, is it students or is it teachers that are being served? Is the outcome, you know, the change for the teacher or for the change for the student? You want to think through those things and how the national performance measure is described to determine whether or not what you're trying to achieve really fits that national performance measure, or whether you need to describe it in a different way and create an applicant determined measure. But certainly, I think you'll find environmental education on the menu. The only reason I'm not going over to it is because I'd have to stop my share. Someone else is offering that they want to place members in classrooms where they'll do small group work and whole class instruction, where they will implement specific anti-racist strategies and prepare to become teachers themselves. So that you'll find on the menu specifically, again, we saw, and I can talk this way, right, the ED1A, where it talks about the number of individuals served as the output, and there is an outcome about academic performance. And in that outcome about academic performance, you get to describe what the subject is and what the assessment is for that. Does the teacher do a specific assessment? Is it a standardized test at the school? Is it the grade that they receive for the class? How are you going to measure the improvement that the students have as a result of the AmeriCorps members doing the small group work? But in the case of the environmental program, if it decided that the menu wasn't a good fit, and I'll follow up afterwards specifically with you, Melissa, you can do an applicant determined performance measure. My video demo might not have been totally perfect, but hopefully you know where the menu is and can do some of your own investigating. When it comes to making an applicant determined measure, I actually still recommend going to the national performance measures as your model and reflecting back. If you made your applicant determined measure, you know, what would it look like if it was put onto the same menu? What sort of short title are you going to have for that output and outcome? What key terms or definitions might you need to explain? And what data collection requirements would make sense in your applicant determined performance measure? It's important to know that we often see in Rhode Island not a applicant determined output and applicant determined outcome, but actually an applicant determined outcome that's paired with a national output, because it's so common, right, that you're working with a group of school students and you have right there, you know, ED1A, the number of individuals served. And you can do that. You can have a national performance measure that includes the output from the menu, but needs to have an outcome that you describe yourself as applicant determined. When you're in eGrants itself, the grant application program on the web, and you're entering in the performance measure, you will find that all of the pre-selected options are there for the national performance measures, but you'll always find buttons that say things like add user output, add user outcome. And you know, you're going to click on that. It's sort of like saying other on a survey form, right? And you're going to have the option to write in your own text in a text box that will appear for you. And yes, we will post the link to the performance measure menu in just a second in the chat. Before we leave performance measures, though, there's a few more things that I want to talk about in developing them. We kind of need to take a deep breath to get through this a little bit. And hopefully you won't run screaming from my attempts to talk through this. But the performance measure module that you'll find in eGrants will ask you specifically to enter the total share of program resources identified as the number of members and the number of MSYs that are directed to the objective or the performance measure. And you'll follow this in the Server-I RFP performance measure instructions section. But there are, of course, focus areas in AmeriCorps, such as education or veterans and military families. And each of these has defined objectives in the eGrants system. So an objective in education is broadly like K-12 education. Within that is an objective. You can also choose other if it doesn't make sense to you, if your focus area or objective or intervention differs significantly from the options in eGrants. My experience is that when applicants work through the instructions, they don't get confused with some of those steps, but they do get confused about the request from AmeriCorps to enter the number of members and the number of MSYs related to the performance measure being reported. So your AmeriCorps member may do all the exact same thing, but it's also true that your program design might send AmeriCorps members to do different types of interventions. They might also spend significant time in their own personal development or in civic reflection, not directly tied to a primary program intervention. It's rare, really, that every hour of an AmeriCorps term of service is spent doing one primary service activity. So as a result, it's most common that you see the amount of time or number of MSYs allocated to the performance measure is a number that's less than the number of AmeriCorps members that you have placed into service. So I just want to say that member and MSY allocations entered in the application should be your best estimate of how member time is allocated. In Appendix A, which I alluded to earlier, in the national performance measures, they have this table to show how MSYs are allocated and how you can come up with that number. So first, what you do is you consider the member's schedule for the total year. And I've made an example. So in the example, we have half-time members. That's 900-hour terms of service, working on an intervention. The program determines that the first 35 hours of their service is really pre-service training. During the year, there's 10 hours spent doing just fun physical service days, team building. There's another 20 hours spent hanging out with Server I and those cool folks, and 70 hours maybe personal development, what we call life after AmeriCorps, and career development activities. And really, when they do that math, only 765 hours are spent on their primary service activity for beneficiaries, which is a percentage of 85%. So they put that information into the chart. They find the halftime member row and they enter the number of members, 20, and then they enter the percent of time that they calculated, 85% of the members' time over the course of the year is spent on that intervention. And they do the math. 0.5 times 20 is 10, times 85% is 8.5. And so the amount of MSYs allocated to the performance measure is 8.5, which is information you're asked to enter into eGrants. Now, right now, that doesn't make a ton of sense, but I promise it will once you're actually doing the application, you're in eGrants, doing your thing. You'll remember this little spiel that I gave, and that will help really expedite and hopefully tamper down some of the confusion about what they're asking for. But it's how many members are working on this performance measure that you're entering, because sometimes it's all of your members, sometimes it's not, and how much of their time over the course of the year is being spent. They want to know that for their own data collection reasons, and it doesn't affect other parts of the application necessarily. Are there specific questions about that before I move on? The other thing that was in that menu of national performance measures was the checklist. And again, I'll just say, please don't skip over it. The performance measure description is not scored as part of the application review, but the measure must be approved before the award is made. And so we call that during the resolution process we have. So Appendix B is a checklist you can use to assess your performance measure and give you a sense of whether or not you're on track. Some of the content you'll find there, is pretty specific. So an example here, number 14 on the list is output and outcome targets are reasonable for the proposed program design, right? So if you're going into 5 classrooms, and each classroom has 25 students in it, but you say you're going to serve 10,000 students, that the math there doesn't work, right? So, that's kind of thing. Number 15, targets are expressed as numbers, not percentages. So when you're counting people, it's numbers of individual people. If you're counting acres of land, it's numbers of acres of land. Things aren't expressed as rates. The outcome is not an increased rate of reading proficiency. It's one individual who is now a better reader. Number 18, data collection methods are appropriate for the outcome being measured. So if you're using a national performance measure, it's pretty specific in there about the types of data collection methods they want you to use and what's appropriate. And you also can use that same model when doing your applicant determined measure. We're going to talk about data collection in just a minute. So what are you going to do really to get started here? You're going to complete the performance measure entry in eGrants, and you're going to need to go to Appendix D in the ServerI RFP, start at the top, and follow the instructions there in order to navigate the technology in eGrants. There's really a very specific design module in the eGrant system, and there's no way around it. It can certainly confuse any new eGrants user, and even at times veteran eGrants users. I can't lie about that. And so you really are going to want to allow for extra time, and remember, not to charge ahead and jump in, because you'll get frustrated, but to actually remember that in the ServerI RFP, there is an Appendix D that walks you through eGrants and the information that you need to provide for each question it's asking you. Now, before you do that, I really can't stress this enough. I recommend that you have a word processing document, a Google Doc, Microsoft Word, or something that you can use to copy and paste the information into eGrants that you've already prepared. We actually have a performance measure worksheet at serverlyland.com/grants that you can use as sort of a template, right, to have all the information ready. But any notepad, if you're still into handwriting, that's great. Just to be prepared before you get into eGrants. The other thing I'd say is you consider the performance measure a standalone product that could be sort of unstapled in a virtual sense from the grant narrative. It's expected that you'll repeat yourself describing your intervention or data collection process here the same way that it appears elsewhere in your grant narrative. Don't be afraid to copy and paste the same sentences, the same information, if that's helpful to you and is time saver that you've already put elsewhere in the grant. In the performance measure module, what you're going to do in eGrants is paste information that includes the following. A problem statement. So just like in your program design description, what is it you're seeking to achieve? More environmental education, more academic enrichment, and what the current state is for your target beneficiaries. How would you describe them? Are they students in a system where the majority of young people receive free and reduced lunch? Or what are some of their demographic characteristics? What are some of their current academic results, right, that are part of your need or problem statement? You're going to describe the intervention briefly that's being carried out. You're going to have a short title for your output and outcome that explains what it is in a very brief sentence, like 7 words or so. You're going to have to figure out your target number. So how many individuals are going to benefit from this service? So how many houses, how many acres of land, whatever it is, because you're also going to tell them what the unit of measurement is, right? And in broad terms, it's a person, right? A unit of measurement. It's a person, it's an inch, it's a car, whatever it is. In the output and outcome, you're also going to describe the data collection method. Those are the pieces that are in the performance measure module. And again, if you're using the national performance measures, some of this content is pre-populated for you to guide you on what things you need to elaborate on. When you're following Appendix D in the eGrants performance measure instructions in the Server I RFP, you'll come to a place where it says data collection tab, which is where in the eGrants you get to talk more about your intervention and your data collection method. So I want to just pause here to review the information in this tab in eGrants, where you have the opportunity really to add a lot of text. In particular, I'm going to need you to detail your dosage, which is a word I always stumble on. It sometimes makes me giggle. We steal this word from doctors in the field of public health. It doesn't always make sense to us program folks, dosage. But that is one of the questions. What is the dosage of this intervention? So I want to unpack that a little bit. And I want to recommend to you that you actually use the words that I'm using right now in describing your performance measure intervention, associated intervention, in the dosage that folks receive. And those words are frequency, intensity, and duration. So frequency refers to how often an intervention occurs. So for example, we'll stick with a mentoring program. The frequency might be 1 session with the mentor per week. Okay? How often the intervention occurs. The intensity is the length of time devoted to the intervention. So in a mentoring program, perhaps each mentoring encounter is 60 minutes in terms of your program design. So once a week for 60 minutes. And duration. Duration is the period of time over which the intervention occurs. So it's a longer period of time, not the 60 minutes, but how much over the period of the grant. So in the mentoring program, this relationship might take place over 34 weeks. So you've got a dosage here of once a week for 60 minutes over 34 weeks. You've got the complete understanding of the dosage. And that's how you're going to describe your intervention. Then for the performance measure, you're asked to describe the specific instrument you'll use to measure this output or outcome, including a title, a brief description of what it measures, and how it will be administered, and details about reliability and validity if that's applicable to you. So what am I talking about? Are you getting this program data from one of your service partners? When do you get it? How do they provide it to you? Do you measure change from a pre-survey to a post-survey? When do you do the survey? Is it done online or in person? Are the people delivering the survey trained? Has the survey been used before, or is it new? And I think something to think about these days is what's different now in a pandemic from COVID-19 that might be temporary, or an alternative plan to what you maybe want to do if there is an impact there from coronavirus. It wouldn't hurt to address that. There are a lot of different methods for data collection. If you need assistance with identifying an appropriate one for your performance measure, I'm happy to talk it through with you. But if you think about your own program is already generating data, especially like logs for attendance purposes, you know, there are people who have standardized tests. One of the most common AmeriCorps data collection methods is a pre-survey and a post-survey. And you know, how you deliver that, just responding to the chat box, whether it's you know, through Google Forms, or whether it's, you know, clipboard with paper and pen, or some fancy database that's really awesome and you've purchased into, isn't you know, isn't that important. I think you know, if you feel that it's safe, convenient, secure in terms of not providing a breach to anyone's personal information, then your method's good. I think in the performance measure section, some of that isn't as important, saying, you know, kind of, you know, we use an online survey tool, right? You don't have to be so specific into exactly how it's done. And, you know, if there's an awarded grant, we like to provide additional technical assistance in thinking through some of the issues of safeguarding personal information, issues of cybersecurity, and all that fun stuff that I was starting to go down a rabbit hole with. So interviews are also valid ways to collect data, and I'm finding more folks using rubrics as a way to score things, score observations, make observations and score things in a rubric. So there's lots of different ways to collect data, and you're probably already doing them. We don't need to dwell too much on it. But I will say that AmeriCorps has this new passion called data quality. And you find this sneaking in words like reliability and validity. And I would say that, you know, if you're knowledgeable about data quality and can address this in your performance measure, you know, please do so. But if the concepts are new, it's causing you writer's block or anxiety, don't get stuck, because again, you know, as a future AmeriCorps grantee, we'll probably provide more information on the topic of data quality and increasing your capacity there. But in the overall application right now, your time is probably better spent focused on other parts of the application rather than wondering about the words reliability and validity. But I'll just very quickly say that reliability is the ability of a method or instrument to yield consistent results when used under the same conditions. So you can improve reliability by administering your instrument of measurement through a protocol that you've established so that it's done the same way every time. You have instructions to the respondents that they can understand. The people collecting the data have standardized instructions and training about what to do. And even the data collectors themselves are monitored to sort of ensure that they do it the same way every time. Or you can kind of interview your data collectors to check their knowledge. And there's another level of review. So before data is sort of said, yep, it's reliable, there's another member of staff who reviews and sort of certifies that the data collected is accurate. So that's a little bit about, just a little bit about reliability. Validity is the ability of a method or instrument to accurately measure what it's intended to measure. In this case, probably your chosen outcome. So validity starts with your theory of change and developing a clear idea of what you need to measure. And once you have a clear understanding of what you're measuring, you can zoom in on the specific questions in your instrument of measurement to make sure that it's really measuring what you're intended. So for example, a lot of outcomes can break down into more specific characteristics or dimensions. So if you're looking at students' attachment to their school, you might ask, how do students feel about being in school, doing their homework? How well do they get along with teachers? Are there conflicts among students? For those different dimensions, it's important to make sure that the questions that you might have in your instrument of measurement address each of those dimensions together, perhaps to get at a valid understanding of attachment, right? Rather than just saying, do you feel attached? Another way to check on validity is to look at whether the results you measure with the instrument are corroborated. Did I say that right? Corroborated, that's what I meant to say, by other available information. So you're using a test of environmental knowledge, but do you also observe a change in knowledge through an interview process, right? Different levels of collecting information about the same thing. Are there questions about data collection, generally speaking? We tried to cover fairly quickly this idea of dosage, that there are different methods you might describe for data collection, and that AmeriCorps has this new kind of passion around data quality that if you feel confident addressing, please do. Another thing you're going to be absolutely sure to include when you're doing your performance measure is a word called improvement. So we have the dosage word and now improvement. Outcomes are defined by change, right? Improvement in knowledge, behavior, condition of an individual or something in the community. Your description of the outcome data collection process must please absolutely every time use the word improvement. Describe how you know that the beneficiary is improved. Describe how your instrument of measurement scores the improvement. So for example, if houses undergo one or more alterations for weatherization, we're going to count that as improved. One or more alterations is the level of improvement. Or on a reading assessment, students have to move from below their grade level to their grade level. That is the movement of improvement that you are looking for in your outcome. So you'll all remember to have the improvement sentence in your performance measure. Before you close the eGrants door on performance measures, you're going to do two things in the system that I want to point out. You're going to click a button that says validate this performance measure. What happens when you do that is eGrants itself sort of checks that you haven't missed any of their text boxes or skipped over any of the information they asked for, or you haven't put in a % sign where there should only be a whole number, that sort of thing. And you won't actually be able to submit your application to ServerI into the grant system until the performance measure has been validated and any errors are fixed. So you just want to take care of that. Once your performance measure is in the system, and by the way, I should say that when you're in the actual eGrant system, you can save what you have done so far and then come back to it. You don't have to do it all at once. It absolutely saves things that you enter for you, and then you come back to them at a later time. But when your performance measure is done, just in case, you are going to hit a button that says print PDF for all performance measures, right? So you've done all of this effort in the eGrant system to enter all the information I was just talking about. You want to make sure a couple things. You want to make sure that you don't lose the information and you don't ever trust computer systems. So you print the PDF for your own records. But you also want to, you know, when you have a breath and you've taken a break, you want to reread your performance measure. And because you were entering a lot of little text in a bunch of different little text boxes, does it all add up? Did you spell things, and did you think that you wrote a sentence that you didn't? It's good to reread the performance measure, obviously, before you submit the application. And print PDF for all performance measures really helps you to do that. So don't skip it. So we're going to take a 60-second pause. For those who didn't arrive when I said this at the very beginning, if you do want to speak directly, right, if you want to unmute yourself by hitting the space bar or Alt-A on a Windows machine or clicking with the mouse button and ask a question, you know, let's do that. If you want to use the chat box to ask a question, because that's been our culture so far in these trainings, feel free to do that. I want to attend to the chat box now. I'm going to give us an opportunity, though, to switch gears from performance measures. We're going to be talking about the evidence section in the application. And before we do that, I just really feel strongly that we should probably for a little bit. if you haven't found a way to virtually be mindful and take breaks during work, I recommend nature videos for sure. No one jumped into the chat box. I won't take offense at that. Because you were busy walking in the woods. I know that we owe, how do I do? All right, I'm gonna have to try, in order to answer the chat box, I have to find a way to temporarily stop the screen I was sharing. There was a question about the link for performance measure instructions. So you can always go to serverisland.com/grants and go there. But here we go. Here is the direct link. And ooh.
Adam?
Yes, hi, Amanda.
Hi, you're on presenter view, just so you know.
Yeah, I was wondering. Good times, good times.
Would you like me to read the questions as they pop up in the chat? Or would you like to just wait until the end to view them yourself?
I wanted to be responsive to that one, but it'd be great if you wanted to interrupt and read them.
Sure.
I think that I'm keeping up. I'm keeping up.
Yes.
I don't hear anyone applauding or cheering for the information they're getting, but oh, I wouldn't expect that. There's a chat. Where did my chat go, though? That's the question. It keeps getting hidden by the slides. We got a thank you. There you go. Some praise. Love it. Made my day. So let's talk evidence. Woo! Evidence is the best. We have always said from the beginning that AmeriCorps grants are awarded to organizations proposing to engage AmeriCorps members in evidence-based or evidence-informed interventions. And your application is really strengthened if it's rooted in analysis of your own program data and published social science. So AmeriCorps reported last year that among all awarded applicants, their assessment of evidence, AmeriCorps' assessment, was 20% of the programs were strong, 15% moderate, 30% preliminary, 35% pre-preliminary. Don't worry, we're going to define those. So you can see there's variation, and all applicants are welcome. I want to stress that from the beginning, all applicants are welcome. But here's the but. There's a clear trend in federal grant making, and especially AmeriCorps, for the number of applications that get funded to have increasingly higher levels of evidence. And I'm going to walk through the application instructions for writing the evidence narrative and offer some tips here. Try and do that within the next 10 minutes or so. So you guys can end the video. So first of all, evidence is 20 points of the application. 20 points, 20 points, 20 points is a lot. 20 points is 20% of the application. That's 1/5 of 100 points. So when you're writing about evidence, it's not optional. You can't skip over it. You really need to address it. And, you know, you might even want to start with a full page of double-spaced text, and feel free to go on over onto that second page, just as a matter of math proportionality. Let the reviewer linger on your evidence and be sure that the section's complete. The way that they look at evidence in the application is you have two assignments. You have to provide information so that AmeriCorps can assign an evidence tier to you, which is pre-preliminary, preliminary, moderate, or strong. And then second, you connect your evidence to the proposed program that you're going to do with the AmeriCorps members. So first you have to understand the tiers. And you know, there's no way to better present this information than just to give it to you on the slide, let you read it and hit a few highlights. So the first level is pre-preliminary. And what they mean by a program that has pre-preliminary evidence, it means that you have not submitted to ServerI or AmeriCorps a report as part of your application that contains an outcome or impact evaluation of the same intervention that you're describing in the application. Though you have probably collected some data similar to performance measures about the work that you're proposing to do. You must, in this tier, describe in your evidence-based section of the application how your program design is evidence-informed. And again, if you do have data that you've collected about your work from the past, even before AmeriCorps was part of it, you'll want to include that in pre-preliminary. But we need to understand this evidence-informed. What does that mean? If you are going to be evidence-informed, you're going to describe how you fit this definition. That you use the best available knowledge, research, and evaluation out there to guide your program design and implementation, even though you do not have scientific research or evaluation that's been done on your intervention. Applicants may be evidence-informed if they have incorporated research from other evidence-based programs into their program design or have collected performance measurement data on the intervention described in the application in the past. So again, there's your own program data and pointing towards evidence, and there's external research from the social science community that we're going to talk more about. So you can achieve pre-preliminary. I believe in you, and you believe in yourself. And some of you will already be at the next tier of evidence, which is described as preliminary. Preliminary evidence means that the applicant, that's you, have submitted with your application one or two outcome evaluation reports that have studied the intervention that you're proposing. Those evaluations don't have to be rigorous experimental models, but they do have to have shown that there was a positive result, right? That you actually were achieving, that the program was actually achieving the outcomes that are making a difference for your beneficiary population. These reports or evaluations can be conducted internally by you or externally by an evaluation expert. This study design must include pre and post assessments. This gets technical now, without a statistically matched comparison group or a post-assessment comparison between intervention and comparison groups. In some cases, a retrospective pre-post assessment may be considered, but its use must be justified in the text of the evaluation report. So really, the main thing here is because it's a non-experimental model in assessing the evidence, there isn't really probably a comparison group described but there has to be an actual report. That is something that you may have written yourself, self-authored, but it is a standalone document that describes an effort by you to study your own data. It can also be something that an external evaluation consultant or someone did for you. To reach up into the moderate level of evidence, the primary difference is that the evaluation that was done would be considered quasi-experimental, and that there were some statisticians involved, some evaluators with some knowledge of how to analyze the data in a more rigorous way. I'm just going to leave this slide there for a minute for you to read if you like. To achieve the strong tier of evidence, it means that there's a scientific experimental design that was involved in an evaluation of the intervention that you're proposing. Trying to think of what's most important. It's really about, right, the actual design of the evaluation that reaches you into the strong category. You can also be designated strong if you have an overall pattern of evaluation findings that show consistently positive results on one or more of your outcomes of interest as they appear in your logic model. And so you could have several quasi-experimental evaluations done about your program over time and be strong, because sometimes for those of you who have been involved in social science research, sometimes experimental models just don't make sense for the type of work that you're trying to do, especially if you don't want to be in a position to have a control group where you're denying potential beneficiaries a service. So these definitions, in addition to being available in this presentation, will be the easiest place for you to grab them, are in what's called the mandatory supplemental information that AmeriCorps publishes, which contains a bunch of different definitions for things that they refer to in their application. Are there questions about any of these categories that folks want to ask? Because what I want to do is talk more about what are you actually going to put into your evidence section. First, I want to say that oftentimes we think to replicate programs that others have done and been evaluated elsewhere. Maybe they appeared in a controlled social science experiment, and we think we're going to replicate them here in Rhode Island. So when it comes to assessing your evidence tier, replication, just want to say, is not the same thing as having evaluated your own program. So if your replication effort is part of that other program's growth, like you're almost like a franchise, you're receiving technical assistance, and we know that you're going to implement the program in the exact same way, and it's a true moment, true copy, then okay, maybe that speaks to your evidence. Just like some of our favorite burger restaurants are the same no matter where we drive across the country. But if you start your own burger restaurant, maybe you have burgers, right? That's a specific feature that's the same, but it isn't actually the same, especially if it's vegetarian. So to the prior evidence is great in being evidence informed in terms of your design, but you cannot claim sort of moderate or strong evidence based on the fact that you're attempting this version of replication. I hope that makes sense.
Adam, we have one question that came in. It says, can I cite a study that shows that environmental advocates all share the trait of having positive nature experiences and mentorship in youth? So she wants to be able to cite a study that shows what her program will be doing.
Yeah, so I think this is the perfect example of yes, absolutely. And it's evidence informed, right? It's informing your design. So you're probably in that application talking about the fact that in your program, and I'm sorry if I get this wrong, but you're going to make sure that these folks have exposure to nature as one of your design elements. And that's because of this evidence that's from this other program or research that was done. That would be perfect to include in the application. So submitting evidence reports. I mentioned very quickly that to qualify for preliminary, moderate, or strong levels of evidence, you actually have to submit additional reports about your work or similar work. And you send them to serveri@ride.ri.gov by the time of the application due date, November 12th. You would only send reports if they are about outcomes, right? Not outputs, but outcomes related to your logic model. And they could be reports that you yourself wrote, or honestly, what's most common is maybe we have one report that's sort of internally done on the program, and then there's a supporting report that is relevant from an academic institution or social science. It's really important that if you're going to send a report, and you're going to have to describe this in the evidence section, that the report matches what you're proposing to do in several different areas. So it shows that on the slide. Your program design and logic model section in your own application have to match those reports fairly closely on the characteristics of the beneficiary population, the characteristics of the population delivering the intervention, like your AmeriCorps members. Dosage, one of my favorite words, is similar in the report to what you're proposing to do. And the context, it's an urban setting, it's a rural setting, that sort of thing. And of course, the outcomes of the intervention have to be the same as the ones that are being talked about in the report. So it's a high bar, there's no doubt. And we're going to talk now about what are you actually writing. So I hope that I'm not confusing you by pointing out the details. So we're going to take a step back. You're going to write your evidence narrative. You've got two different standards that you're being upheld to. First, the evidence tier, and second, your response is reviewed for the quality of your evidence. But I want you to think about it as one single story of evidence. First, I want you to claim your evidence tier. Don't let AmeriCorps do it for you. You state that the XYZ program is preliminary, or insert your evidence tier, according to the AmeriCorps evidence continuum. The XYZ program is, insert evidence tier, according to the AmeriCorps evidence continuum. You make your claim. Second, now if you've claimed preliminary or higher, you're going to go immediately to describing the reports that you're submitting with the application, explaining the connection between your intervention and the intervention in the report along all of those characteristics that I just quickly highlighted, the beneficiaries, the interveners, the folks delivering the service, the dosage, the design, the context, and the outcomes. You're going to talk about the reports and why you're submitting them and how they're relevant. So you're going to say, in report X, the characteristics of the beneficiary population are ... And the beneficiary population that we will serve matches in this way ... The report describes an intervention that does this. Our program will also do this ... So really be explicit in making those connections. Don't let the reviewer make their own conclusions. I guess that's what I'm saying. And then regardless of the evidence here now that you have chosen, you're going to describe other evidence now that supports your program. So even if you're saying you've gone to the report route and you're preliminary, moderate, or strong, you're going to then backfill that with more information, your own program data, perhaps, or research you've done. If you're pre-preliminary, you're going to go straight into talking about your own past performance and how your design is evidence-informed because of some research that you have. You have an opportunity here to demonstrate past program data. I think that's really helpful. And also research that informs your theory of change. And it is important to kind of put on your research paper hat from high school, college, grad school, whatever it was, and remember to cite external sources. So like a term paper, we're going to add a parenthesis right into the text. We're going to mention an author's name, a publication title, and a date from within the past 6 years, preferably, that helps draw a connection between social science research and your program design. I really strongly recommend, if this is a little bit out of the box for you, that you find at least one aspect of your program design. Through the question recently, we had a great example, right? The exposure to nature, if memory serves. But maybe it's the frequency that you need to have contact with the beneficiary. Maybe it's a specific curriculum. I don't know, right? It depends on your program. But what AmeriCorps might call a core component of the design, and connect that to something in social science research. So how are you going to find this research? You got to look for this evidence if you don't already have it. My favorite thing is to dial professor. No matter what you're proposing to do, there's an academic in our area who has some connection to that. And it's so much fun for an academic to get to deliver their knowledge onto you and to help an actual community program. I think that they look forward to those opportunities. And I'm not just being silly, I really do think that's true. I also would recommend to you the idea of engaging a relevant graduate program and thinking about giving this as a project to an intern. I think also we discount our state agencies and the amount of research-based information that they are sharing in your field about whether it be education, health, the environment, right? There's a state agency relative to the social need that you're trying to achieve. And their websites are often packed full of relevant information about why they're doing things the way that they're doing and it being research-based. I think that membership associations are also a great place to find evidence. So if you're, no matter what we're into these days. There's a national or statewide network of folks who are doing similar types of work and are sharing information that's relevant here. AmeriCorps itself has an evidence exchange website. And if you have the time to poke around in there, I would recommend it. You can do keyword searches. You can search by focus areas like education versus healthy futures, and find examples of evaluations of AmeriCorps programs that have happened all across the country, hundreds and hundreds of them. And one of the things that they did recently, which I think is super helpful, is there are a few evidence briefs in certain subjects. The ones I know are economic opportunity, education, and healthy futures, where they provide a summary of studies that have been done on other AmeriCorps programs, right, and how they operate. So if you think about it, right, you're going to be using AmeriCorps members to do your service, and so it might make sense that some of the evidence that informs your program might come from other AmeriCorps experience. And there's been 26 years now to draw from, so there's quite a bit of evidence available for what's working. There are questions about this or other suggestions for where you can find evidence? Of course, your own program. I was just addressing external ideas. So how are they going to then review what you write about your evidence? So you do get higher points for higher levels of evidence in terms of being on the evidence tier. There's no way of getting around that. But they also award points based on the degree to which your summary of evidence demonstrates that you meet all the requirements of the evidence tier that you've chosen. So once you've landed on that and you want to go back to that definition and find a way to describe your evidence so that it leaves no doubt that you fit the definition for that tier. They're going to assess the quality of evidence. And so when you think about pre-preliminary, which regardless of what tier, right, you can get 8 full points for having a good explanation of your pre-preliminary evidence. You're going to need to do the following. You're going to need to address this. The applicant uses relevant evidence, including past performance measured data or the cited research to inform the program design. The described evidence is recent, from the past 6 years. The evidence described by the applicant indicates a meaningful positive effect on program beneficiaries in a key outcome. So obviously, it's not going to do you much good to present evidence that what you want to achieve, the way you want to achieve it, doesn't actually work, right? That's pretty obvious. But in assessing the quality of preliminary, moderate, and strong, the review score is based on addressing the 3 standards that you see here. If your evidence tier is preliminary, moderate, or strong, note that we'll be looking specifically then at the submitted reports, and your narrative is really helping us walk through those reports. The submitted reports are satisfactory in terms of their methodology. The rigor of evaluation meets that tier. again, that they're from the past 6 years, and that the submitted reports show a meaningful and significant positive effect. But the key here is that you've provided information that helps us review the additional reports that you've submitted. One thing to know about the evidence section that just might be interesting to you is that after Server I reviews the application and recommends you potentially to the national competition, AmeriCorps is actually going to take the evidence section out of your application and the reports, if relevant, and they're going to send them to an external reviewer who are professional evaluators, an evaluation firm. And they are going to make a report that they give to CNCS about how they evaluated your evidence and ways that you can improve in the future. They only provide this to applications that are then funded generally, but eventually we get those reports and we'll be able to share them with you. But again, they themselves don't assume that they have knowledgeable evaluators sprinkled throughout their review staff, so they contract externally to do this. So they are really looking for some social science expertise. Simple, right? Easy breezy. When it comes to describing evidence. It is long past time. You have been very patient listening to me, and I would love to answer questions, especially if I was talking and caused confusion at any point.